Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. One of my favorite and sometimes most colorful news personalities on the radio was Paul Harvey. I always enjoyed listening to his noon news, page 1, page 2. I can still hear the voice. But the other piece he did that I always thought was fun was a piece called The Rest of the Story. In the story of Gideon, there is the part of the story that you know from Sunday school class, and then there's the rest of the story that never makes the Sunday school class. The part you know has God raising up another judge to deliver the people yet again, this time from the Midianites. God comes to Gideon while he's beating out his wheat in a wine press because of fear of the Midianites coming and stealing his grain. So I get the picture of this wheat flying up above the wine press every once in a while, coming back down so that the wind can blow the chaff away and the wheat kernels come back down into the wine press. And God comes to him and says, I want you to deliver my people. And Gideon says, okay. And then later he says, I think I need a sign here. So I'll tell you what, God, I'll put this fleece out tonight. And if you make the fleece wet and all the ground around it dry, then I'll know that you really mean what you're saying. So God makes the fleece wet and all the ground around it dry. The next day, Gideon says, well, that was pretty good. That was good. But I need more. Tonight I'm going to put the fleece out, and I want you to make the ground wet and the fleece dry. So God does that the next night. Many times modern Christians talk about throwing out the fleece as a way of getting signs from God about what to do. Throwing out the fleece in Gideon's case was really a sign of a weak faith, not a strong faith. It was Gideon not being willing to accept what God had already told him to do. It was a sign of a weak faith. Yet God uses that. And so Gideon recruits an army. Got a big army. God says, you got too many. You see, because the person that fights this battle is going to be God. He doesn't need a lot of men if he's going to fight the battle. He says to Gideon, send some of them home. So Gideon says, everybody that doesn't really want to be here, go home. 90% of his army leaves. So presumably Gideon kind of looks at God and says, okay, are we okay now? And God says, no, you still got too many. You got to get rid of some more. And so they do this thing where they take the whole army to a river and they say, get a drink. And the ones that just stick their face in the water get to go home. The ones that scoop it up in their hands and lap it up, they become the army. God takes an army down to 300 men to fight the whole Midianite army. That's the army. And you remember this story. There's clay pots and torches and trumpets, and Gideon's army of 300 comes running down a hill while the Midian army is encamped at the bottom, throwing down the pots, hollering, blowing the trumpets. The Midianites had camels. Camels don't take to a lot of racket and confusion very well, and probably what happened is this army was trampled by their own camels as all of this noise and all this racket came down from the hills around. At any rate, Gideon's army fights the battle, wins it. The nation is delivered from the Midianites, and you think, we're going to have a happy ending. There's a rest of the story. And it's not a very happy rest of the story. Gideon goes back home. The people try to make a king out of him. He says, no, I'm not going to be your king. Yahweh is your king. And then in verse 27 of chapter 8 in the book of Judges, Gideon made an ephod of it. This is all the gold that they got from the Midianites, off the camels especially. Gideon made an ephod of it, put it in his city in Ophrah, and all Israel played the harlot after it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. In effect, the rest of the story is Gideon, this great leader of men, this leader called out by God, builds something that becomes an idol, and the people worship the idol rather than Yahweh, who had just delivered them. Now you know the rest of the story.